Usually I find that people are not serious, meaning they want an answer, but they don't want to do the work.
Right. Yeah.
Dr. Huberman's message is clear. Having dreams is great, but it's the effort that counts, you know? You can't escape hard work needed to achieve your goals, but you gotta be willing to accept those hits, to take them and make the first step. So, let your dreams guide you, but let your actions define you. Believe in yourself, take action, and never give up, for that's the path to achieving your dreams.
It's really simple. Can you not eat until 2 p.m.? I was like, yeah, I'm not hungry in the morning. I'm like, great, drink coffee, drink water, and in the morning get up and just get on, either run or get on some exercise bike and just pedal like someone's chasing you with a syringe full of poison. So, I mean, and the reason I felt any, sense of agency in giving this information is, yeah, I've done a bunch of different things in neuroscience related to vision and neuroplasticity and stress, but I've done some work and continue to do some work with special operations and some of these groups that are interested in how you use biology to improve human performance over long periods of time. Okay, so basketball players, military, these kinds of things. And so there's a pretty straightforward formula where when you've been asleep all night, your fuel reserves, like you've got fuel in your fat, you guys don't have any of that, but you got fuel in your fat, you've got fuel in your muscles that can be burned, and you got fuel in your liver. It's called glycogen. And when you wake up early, all of that is as low as it's going to be because you haven't been eating anything.
Gotcha.
And so if you exercise then, your body starts dropping into your body fat stores quicker. Look, do it fasted, and then continue to hydrate, and then eat your first meal in the afternoon.
Dr. Huberman knows the importance of starting your engine in the morning to get rid of unwanted fat. Working with special operations, he understands the need to move and burn fuel. In this video, you're going to discover why it's crucial to kickstart your metabolism early.
Very few people can just take the menu and just do it, right?
Right.
The beauty of being young is that neuroplasticity, your nervous system's ability to change in response to experience, to learn things, is at its absolute peak. However, you don't have that much control over your life when you're young, right? Especially when you're really young. As you get older, it gets harder to change your nervous system, but you can do it. But the advantage you have is that you can direct exactly what changes you want to happen. And so there are two different ways to change your nervous system depending on whether or not you're younger or you're older. And it's not like the gate drops right at 25.
Okay.
It just tapers off. If somebody is an adult, you can't change their mind.
Right.
You literally can't. They have to make the decision to do that. Parallel pathways, as the name suggests, are pathways. They could be neural pathways or hormonal pathways or otherwise that operate independently of one another to accomplish a common goal. First of all, I'm a big proponent and consumer of yerba mate. Yerba mate is a tea that can promote the release of glucagon-like peptide 1. And there are also new prescription drugs that are now hitting the market and for which there are really impressive clinical trials for diabetes and obesity that are essentially glucagon-like peptide 1 stimulators. So they stimulate the release of that, or they are in fact a synthetic version of glucagon-like peptide 1. What is glucagon-like peptide 1? It is a peptide, which is a small little protein that can dramatically suppress appetite. So that's why these drugs are being explored and are showing quite impressive results for things like treatment of type 2 diabetes and other forms of diabetes, as well as obesity. So they lead to weight loss. Now, in terms of the yerba mate stimulation of glucagon-like peptide 1, that's going to be a much lower amount of glucagon-like peptide 1 that's released from drinking yerba mate, as opposed to, say, taking a drug that stimulates GLP-1 or taking a drug that is GLP-1. Nonetheless, I should also point out that yerba mate comes in a bunch of different forms. There is some concern about certain smoky flavored forms of yerba mate being carcinogenic. So that's why I avoid those forms of yerba mate. But for me, yerba mate is one of the preferred sources of caffeine for me. I like the way it tastes. It does provide that sort of caffeine kick that I like to have early in the day for focus and for work and for exercise. And yet I actively avoid the smoked varieties of yerba mate because of the potential carcinogenic effects of the smoked varieties. Glucagon-like peptide 1, as I mentioned earlier, can suppress appetite. It does that by at least two mechanisms through parallel pathways. Glucagon-like peptide GLP-1 acts on receptors in the body in a portion of the nervous system called the enteric nervous system. This is a component of your nervous system that you don't really have control over. It's autonomic or automatic. GLP-1 binds to what are called intestinophugal enteric neurons. You don't need to know the name, but those neurons do two things. First of all, they cause some gut distension. So they actually make you feel full. This is incredible, right? A peptide, not actual physical food, but a peptide that stimulates neurons that cause changes in the so-called mechanoreceptors of the gut, of the enteric nervous system, and make people feel full. So it can lead to actually mild, or I suppose if levels of GLP-1 are very high, to major gut distension. Okay, I think that the levels of GLP-1 that would come from drinking yerba mate and hopefully from appropriate dosaging of the synthetic forms of GLP-1 or drugs that stimulate GLP-1 would cause mild, not major gut distension, because major gut distension would be uncomfortable. So GLP-1 is acting at the level of gut to increase gut distension, and by way of a pathway that goes from the gut up to the hypothalamus, this little cluster of neurons about the size of a marble that sits above the roof of your mouth, is also suppressing appetite through brain mechanisms. So this is really beautiful, right? You have a peptide, a small little protein that's released in the gut, and that release within the gut causes gut distension, which makes you feel full, and by way of neural stimulation of the hypothalamus, also activates neural pathways within the brain that trigger satiety, the feeling of having had enough food. So to me, GLP-1 is both impressive and important. Why? Because this recent category of drugs that's now hitting the market seems to adjust obesity or can help people with weight loss in order to help their health. And it's doing so by at least two mechanisms. One is within the brain, and the other is within the gut and communication through the so-called gut-brain axis. But at the same time, things like yerba mate, and I'm sure there are other compounds out there as well, but certainly yerba mate can stimulate the release of GLP-1. So for those of you that are looking for some mild appetite suppression and want to accomplish that while also ingesting caffeine, yerba mate might be a good option for that. And then for everybody, not just those that are interested in appetite suppression, I think it's important to understand that these parallel pathways are fundamental to how we are organized. Another good example of this would be when we are excited by something, positive or negative, so it could be stressful or we're positively aroused. There is a parallel activation of epinephrine, adrenaline, both from your adrenals and from an area in the brain called the locus ceruleus. So again and again, we see this in biology and in neuroscience, that your brain and your body are acting in concert. They're acting together through mechanisms that either are independent, so separately in the brain and separately in the body, but directed towards a common goal, or through communication between brain and body. And almost always, that communication is going to be bidirectional, body to brain and brain to body. Most of what you see out there on the internet focuses more on what you could eat and should eat or shouldn't eat. It concentrates on exercise, but the burn factor, your thermogenic environment, is one of the, if not the most important factors in this business of fat loss. What I'd like you to know is that this is a two-part process. One is fat mobilization, and the second is fat oxidation or utilization, okay? So the first thing that has to happen for body fat to get burned up or used and reduced is that it has to get mobilized. You just have to move that fat out of the position that it's in. You have to get it out of the fat cells, all right? Fat cells can be visceral around our viscera, our organs, or they can be subcutaneous under our skin. So here's the deal. Basically, stored fat has two parts that are relevant here. It's got the fatty acid part, and that's the part that your body can use, and that's attached to something called glycerol, and they're linked by a backbone. So the first step is to get those fatty acids moving around in the bloodstream, to get them out of those fat cells. And then they can travel and be used for energy. The second part is oxidation, is then those fatty acids, those are potential fuel. They're just potential fuel, but you haven't burned the fat yet. You've just moved it out of your fat cells. They're going to go into cells that can use them for energy. And once they are inside those cells, they're still not burned up. You need to oxidize them. Think oxidation is the burn up part. They need to be moved into the mitochondria. And then they can be converted into ATP, into energy. So just to really zoom out again to make sure I don't lose anybody, you got to mobilize the fat, then you have to oxidize the fat. You have to, in other words, you have to mobilize it, then you actually have to convert it into energy. So let's talk about how to use cold and how to leverage shiver as a particularly strong stimulus to increase fat loss through mobilization and oxidation of these fatty acids. So in recent years, there's been a growing interest in the use of cold for various things like improving stress tolerance, improving metabolism, recovery from exercise. But most people out there are using cold exposure, typically by taking cold showers or by getting into cold water of some other kind, a lake or a river or a cold bath or an ice bath. And they are doing that probably with mixed goals, meaning they both would like to increase their metabolism and burn fat, as well as improve mental resilience. So we have several kinds of fat, 3 kinds in fact. We have white fat, white adipose tissue, and we have brown fat or brown adipose tissue. And there's a 3rd kind, which is beige adipose tissue. White fat is the type that we traditionally think of as fat, subcutaneous fat. And it is not particularly rich in mitochondria. It is there as an energy storage site. And we have to mobilize the fat out, as we talked about before, and burn it up elsewhere. Brown fat largely exists between our shoulder blades and on the back of our neck, and it's rich with mitochondria, which is why it's called brown fat. Beige fat is sort of in between. It's white fat that could be brown fat because it has some mitochondria in it, but not as many as brown fat. Now, cold exposure does several things. Making ourselves cold can allow us to build up mental resilience, because getting into cold of any kind, doesn't matter if it's a cryo chamber, doesn't matter if it's a cold day and you forgot your sweater or your parka, it doesn't matter if it's an ice bath or you're lying down in the snow. Cold causes the release of adrenaline from your adrenals, and it causes the release of epinephrine from these neurons that connect to fat. Now, the big effects of cold on metabolism and fat burning are going to be through 2 routes. One is that if you expose yourself to cold, you have the opportunity to trigger activation of brown fat, as well as to convert more beige fat into true brown fat. So you essentially create a stronger or a hotter furnace. That's the way to think about brown fat. It's like a furnace. And so with this principle that we started with of calories in versus calories burned, what you're doing is you're increasing the amount of burning, you're increasing the burn of energy by increasing the intensity of the heat inside you, so to speak. No matter who you are, it's probably not a good idea to be really large. It's actually, any large animal lives less long than the smaller version of that same animal. And it's because of the dosing of this one gene called insulin growth factor. Okay. So Andre the Giant died young. People that have acromegaly, you know, the forehead ridge and the huge hands, they don't live very long because all their organs are huge. Everything that extends your life has to do with keeping a lighter weight. Now, there's nothing wrong with putting on a little bit of extra muscle if you want to be stronger for whatever reason. Yeah. But when you get past a certain point, it does shorten your life. There's no question about it, because it's like a second puberty. Yeah. Right? And the fastest rate of aging that you will ever go through at any stage is puberty. Fuel in your fat, you've got fuel in your muscles that can be burned, and you've got fuel in your liver. It's called glycogen. And when you wake up early, all of that is as low as it's going to be because you haven't been eating anything. Got you. And so if you exercise then, your body starts dropping into your body fat stores quicker.
In today's fast-paced world, Dr. Huberman's revelation about morning body fat reduction is truly inspiring. By harnessing the power of our body's natural rhythm, we can achieve exponential fat loss simply by embracing early morning activity. And that's just the beginning.
Fat loss is something that interests a large number of people. Many people want to lose fat. Many people are athletes who need to lose fat. And in general, we know that having body fat percentages that are too high is unhealthy for us. And most people struggle to lose fat. Most people struggle to lose weight generally, but most people especially struggle to lose body fat, or what we call adipose tissue. Now, this is a huge topic on the internet. There's a lot of controversy. Today, we're going to talk about some things related to fat loss and that are powerful for fat loss, that I'm guessing most of you have never heard about before. You may have heard about a few of them, but I'm guessing you haven't heard about all of them. And this is, I think, an important gap that's missing in the discussion about fat loss. You can hear a lot of information out there about the role of things like insulin and various diets like ketogenic diets or vegan diets or Mediterranean diets. And there's some great stuff out there, and there's some really terrible information out there, and there's a lot of controversy. We did a number of episodes talking about the role of hormones on metabolism and the role of food on mood and well-being. I will touch a little bit on hormones today, things like insulin and leptin, just a little bit, how those encourage or can encourage accelerated fat loss, because it turns out they can. Remember, your nervous system, which includes your brain and your spinal cord and all the connections that they make with the organs of the body, governs everything. It's the on switch and the off switch for your immune system. It's the on switch and the off switch, it turns out, also for fat burning. And so the nervous system and the role of the brain and other neurons has been vastly overlooked in the discussion about losing fat. Now, I would be remiss, and I'd probably come under a pretty considerable attack if I didn't just acknowledge up front a core truth of metabolic science and also of neuroscience, frankly, which is that calories in versus calories out, meaning how many calories you ingest versus how many calories you burn, is the fundamental and most important formula in this business of fat loss and weight management in general. There's simply no way around the fact that if you ingest far more calories than you burn, you're likely to gain weight. And a good portion of that weight is likely to be adipose tissue, fat. It's also true that if you ingest fewer calories than you burn, that you will lose weight, and that a significant portion of that will come from body fat. What portion depends on a number of factors, but that simple formula is important. How highly processed foods change the way that we utilize food and can lead to higher incidences of obesity and other metabolic syndromes that go against the idea that a calorie is a calorie and that's it. So a calorie is a calorie as a unit of energy, and we need to accept and acknowledge this calories in, meaning calories ingested versus calories burned formula. But the calories burned portion is strongly influenced by a number of things that you can control that can greatly accelerate or increase the amount of adipose tissue or the proportion of adipose tissue that you burn in response to exercise and food. And people ask me this kind of stuff all the time.
Yeah.
Like, what do I do? How do I sleep better? How do I stop stressing? And usually I find that people are not serious, meaning they want an answer, but they don't want to do the work.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So I was like, look, it's really simple. Can you not eat until 2 p.m.? I was like, yeah. I'm not hungry in the morning. I'm like, great, drink coffee, drink water, and in the morning, get up and just either run or get on some exercise bike and just pedal like someone's chasing you with a syringe full of poison.
Right in the morning after when you wake up.
Yeah, or, after a few minutes, give yourself some time, go to the bathroom. You're serious.
Get up and go. I have questions about this
Early
because
day.
I'm the opposite, right? I find it hard for me to gain weight and stuff like that. So please continue, though. I got this question after.
Yeah. So, the reason I felt any sense of agency in giving this information is, I've done a bunch of different things in neuroscience related to vision and neuroplasticity and stress, but I've done some work and continue to do some work with special operations and some of these groups that are interested in how you use biology to improve human performance over long periods of time.
Okay.
So, basketball players, military, these kinds of things. And so there's a pretty straightforward formula where when you've been asleep all night, your fuel reserves, like you've got fuel in your fat, you guys don't have any of that, but you got fuel in your fat, you've got fuel in your muscles that can be burned, and you've got fuel in your liver. It's called glycogen. And when you wake up early, all of that is as low as it's going to be because you haven't been eating anything.
Got you.
And so if you exercise then, your body starts dropping into your body fat stores quicker. So what I was trying to give Mike was a tool that would allow him to see some results really quickly. Oh. So I said, look, do it fasted and then continue to hydrate and then eat your first meal in the afternoon. And I said, and also, do you like drinking? And he was like, well, I don't know. I drink mostly because it kind of sets me straight up here. And I was like, well, we can talk about the stuff to kind of set your head level. He wasn't spun out. He just obviously was medicating with alcohol.
Sure.
I didn't detect anything dysfunctional about him. He was just reporting to me that he wanted some assistance.
Right.
So I said, would you be willing to drop the drinking or pare it back? Yeah. And he said, sure. So, okay. So explain that. And I said, look, and here's my number. Just for the anxiety and stress management, I'll give you some breathing, some respiration tools that work really well, that are not, woo mysticism. It's not, I'm not going to tell you to meditate 30 minutes a day, although that's a cool practice too. I'm going to give you some tools you can use in real time as you're working hard and dealing with whatever it is you're dealing with in life. Okay. So that ends, the conversation ends. A year later, Mike reaches out and says, hey man, thanks for all that stuff you gave me. I was like, oh, cool. And he's like, I lost 60 pounds and I haven't had a sip of alcohol since we talked last and feeling pretty good.
Damn.
And I was like, so how did you do it? I get on the bike and I pedal as hard as I can and like someone chasing me with a syringe full of poison. Sure. And, I was like, he remembered. And I was so impressed. Like very few people can just take the menu and just do it.
Go.
Right?
Right.
And maybe it's his Midwest upbringing. I mean, he did get gifted
But some people also, I feel like, reach that point in their life where they're like, it's time. This is whether it's smoking or drinking. Like you can't quit smoking unless you're mentally prepared to. Right? It's like there's that switch.
Look, I always say the beauty of being young is that neuroplasticity, your nervous system's ability to change in response to experience, to learn things, is at its absolute peak. However, you don't have that much control over your life when you're young,
right?
Especially when you're really young. As you get older, it gets harder to change your nervous system, but you can do it. But the advantage you have is that you can direct exactly what changes you want to happen. And so there are two different ways to change your nervous system depending on whether or not you're younger or you're older. And it's not like the gate drops right at 25. Okay. It just tapers off. But Mike made the decision, and I always say, you if somebody is an adult, you can't change their mind.
Right.
You literally can't. They have to make the decision to do that. And he flipped the switch.
He flipped it.
He flipped it, and he's still there. And I think he feels much better.
Yeah.
Get strong, how to build muscle mass that like broaden and deepen your understanding of that task.
Definitely. And I'll do these in bullet points because if people want the logic behind them and the mechanism, they can listen to that episode.
Yeah, it's a really good episode.
I'll start with heat and cold really quickly and just say that avoid cold immersion, so ice baths and being in cold water up to the neck, uncomfortably cold, within the 4 hours after a training session that's designed to evoke an adaptation, either endurance, hypertrophy, or strength, because the inflammation that you experience from a hard endurance workout or from a hard strength or a hard hypertrophy workout is the stimulus that you're going to adapt to. The cold water immersion reduces inflammation and can short circuit some of that. After 4 hours, you're probably okay, but if you can do it a different day or you can do it before those sessions, that's better. Heat, however, can be done immediately after training, and it's probably beneficial because of the way that it dilates the vascular system and perfuses the muscles and ligaments, etc., with more nutrients.
And I should just mention that was a crucial piece of information. It's a little bit surprising. Was it surprising to you?
Absolutely. Because the way I posed the question to him about cold was, I hear that getting into an ice bath or a cold water immersion after training can reduce hypertrophy, but I'm guessing it's not that big of a deal. And he said, no, it is a big deal. It will short circuit your progress. Now, for people that are only interested in performance, who are doing a lot of workouts and trying to recover, but not trying to grow muscle, get stronger, or build endurance, then it makes sense to do cold.
Like skill development or something.
Skill development, or you're an athlete in season. Pick 3 exercises, compound exercises, multi-joint movements. Do 3 to 5 exercises for 3 to 5 repetitions per set. Rest 3 to 5 minutes and do that 3 to 5 times per week. And for details, you can, again, look to the episode. It's time-stamped. But what's interesting about this is 3 to 5 times a week is a lot for a muscle group. Squatting 5 times a week for 5 reps, meaning you're working pretty heavy, meaning you're close to failure, but not failure for strength, generally. People who are training mostly for strength can do these low rep type regimens frequently because most of the adaptation is neural. And because you're not pushing to failure in most cases, you don't get that sore. And so it's the motor neurons getting the muscle fibers to contract more intensely or with more efficiency in other ways, that's leading to these strength gains. And this is why powerlifters can train every day or 5 days a week or 4 days a week. For hypertrophy, the repetition range can be pretty broad. You think anywhere from 6 to 30 repetitions. You should do 10 sets per muscle group per week, maybe even a bit more.
So high volume.
High volume, but you have to go to failure or beyond in order to stimulate growth. Why does it work at such a great range of repetitions? Well, there apparently are 3 ways that you stimulate hypertrophy, and maybe more. One is tissue microdamage to the tissue. The other is through some sort of tension-based changes in the molecular gene programs of cells that lead to protein synthesis that are distinct from damage. And the other are metabolic effects of like high repetition work of superfusion of the muscle with blood. We know that third category exists because people are now doing this blood restriction training where they cuff off a muscle and they'll use a really light weight. I've done these before. You can use a 5-pound weight and do curls with this, and you are in pain and the muscles are swelling up with blood. It does lead to hypertrophy, but in general, you're not sore, you're not doing tissue damage. And by the way, don't just tourniquet off a muscle because you have to use the proper cuffs because you need the blood still to flow in one direction. You can't just cinch it off, or you'll potentially kill yourself if you get a clot or you do it wrong. So get the appropriate cuffs. They're out there. And then for endurance, I learned something really cool. So I work out, basically, I go to the gym every other day on average. 3 or 4 days a week I do that, but generally not 2 days in a row. It's workout. Next day I'll do cardio. Next day. And the cardio for me is always a 30 to 45 minute jog, kind of zone 2 cardio. Andy informed me that to build endurance while building strength and maintaining some muscle size, or even building muscle size, I would be wise to take 1 day a week and add to that all out max heart rate work for 90 seconds at least. So do 90 seconds, then rest, and then maybe do another 90-second all out sprint. I almost missed my flight going from Los Angeles to Austin. I did that all out sprint in the airport yesterday. So I actually think it's done for me.
So there was a sprinting Dr. Huberman throughout
with 3 bags.
That's awesome.
Because I travel. I'll travel with too much stuff.
I love how you were probably running late for a flight and you used that as an opportunity to explore.
Well, as I was doing it, I was thinking to myself, okay, Andy, that's a 90-second sprint. Because I got to the security line, I finally got TSC.
But that's for extending endurance?
It actually has some carryover effects on endurance if you're doing the other stuff. And then he also said 1 day a week to do this workout, and I haven't done it yet. Maybe we do it tomorrow, it'd be fun. Which is you run a mile, you ask yourself, how long did that take? Let's say it took 8 minutes. Then you walk or rest for 8 minutes. Then you run another mile as fast as you can, and then you rest for the equivalent period. And you do that 1 to 3 times once per week. So as an all-around fitness program, you could collapse this into something where you say, okay, you're going to work out with the weights for about an hour every other day. Maybe take 2 days off every once in a while, maybe not. You're going to do 6 to 15 repetitions. You're going to push to failure on some of those, not all, because some of those are designed to build more strength. You're not going to failure and heavier. Some are designed for hypertrophy, higher rep, and going to failure. And then on off days, you're going to jog for 30 to 45 minutes. But for 2 days a week, you're either at the end of your jog or whatever, you're going to do some all-out sprints for 90 seconds and then rest and repeat. And for another day, you're going to do these mile repeats. That's a pretty large chunk of exercise movement. But if you kind of thread through the middle of all that, what you end up with is some decent strength building protocols, some decent hypertrophy, some cardiovascular training that establishes the so-called A base or a so-called base. So you're not going to get really good at anything. You're not going to become a marathoner this way, an optimizing marathon,